O'Reilly. Are your wiper blades chattering, skipping, or squeaking? Don't let streaks or smearing on your windshield compromise your visibility. When it's time to replace your wiper blades, stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts and see our selection. Our professional parts people will even install your new wiper blades while you wait. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.
Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 92 of the Hunting Collective. I am Benjamin Patrick O'Brien, and I'm joined by Phil, middle name Taylor.
Charles.
Philip Charles Taylor.
Philip Charles Taylor.
Philip Charles Taylor III. He's also an engineer here at Meat Eater. And we're bringing you another show. Another week, another show. This one is good. I promise. We have Ryan Cal Callahan, host of Cal's Week in Review, mustachioed man of mystery. You will very much enjoy what he has to say. We talked about Phil's first hunt. You more excited now, Phil?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And
I mean, you said Phil's first hunt, just it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Clarification.
No, I'm trying to build suspense.
Yes. Good.
Phil's first hunt, which hasn't happened yet, and how to mentor, what it means to be a mentor, how to do it a little bit better. Cal's got a great perspective on that. He's been taking new hunters out for a long time, thinking about this for a long time. And so we're going to do that. We got a work sharp, not so sharp moment. We're dwindling down on the number of those we're going to run, so you'll hear about that. And then we went to Princeton, New York, to hang out, or Princeton, New Jersey, sorry, to hang out with Tovar Cerulli. He's the author of the book, The Mindful Carnivore, was a vegan and became a hunter, wrote about that. But in the years since he's written that book, he's done a lot for conservation, does a lot of work in the field. So it's great chat with Tovar. But before we get to that, Phil, I just burped. Did you cut it out?
Yes, it has been cut out.
I can't even get through.
I don't want to expose the listeners to that sound.
No, I'm sorry. We'll keep going. And now, this episode.
I guess I grew up on an older road. A pedal to the metal, always did what I was told. Until I found out that my brand new clothes came secondhand from the rich kids next door. When I grew up fast, I guess I grew up mean. There's 1,000 things inside my head I wish I ain't seen. And now I just wander through a real bad dream, or feeling like I'm coming apart at the seams. But thank you, Jack Daniels. Oh, number 7.
Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 92. Is that right, Phil? 92?
That's correct.
Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Episode 92 of the Hunting Collective. We're coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, inside the wonderfully adorned podcast studio. Phil, do you have anything to do with this?
Absolutely nothing. That would be producer Corinne Schneider.
Oh, boy.
The All-Star.
The All-Star? They did all this decorating. There's a small tree in the middle. Lights. It's wonderful.
Coconut air freshener.
Cal, do you have any Christmas traditions or anything like that you do?
I like to go hunting, or I do a lot of cooking.
Simple but effective.
Yes.
Very on brand.
It's very similar to many of the other days of the year.
Generally, it's like you have time off, and you want to do the things you don't do when you have to work, which is cook eat, hunt, hang around with your family. I don't really have any Christmas traditions. In fact, I'm not really that big into Christmas, Cal. I will admit.
I have a hard time with Christmas because there's just like a lot of undue pressure that people put on themselves, which is I just find to be like absolutely not the point at all.
Yeah.
At all. In fact, I've told many of my aunts in high moments of stress, like, if people don't like the way your food turned out, fuck those people.
Fuck them. That's kind of like my Christmas saying.
Fuck them.
Fuck them. If you didn't get the present that you liked, I don't buy anybody presents. Do you buy presents for people, Cal?
I buy presents when I'm like, oh, this is like the thing.
Yeah.
This is a necessary thing. And I'm kind of getting a little bit, and my sister knows this. My older sister knows this. But I feel like she is now gone to like, well, I'm going to make sure I get you presents because I want you to get your nephew presents because now he's old enough to like put two and two together.
So she's guilt tripping you?
I feel, but I mean, that's just like growing up in a big Catholic family. That's, yeah.
Catholic guilt.
Yeah, she's going to have to bring her A game at
At
this
every
point.
turn.
Yes.
I feel so guilty already.
Yes.
No, I do. I wouldn't buy gifts for children. That's fine. I have 8 nieces and nephews and a son. And so that's 9 people right there I got to buy gifts for. That's enough. If you're an adult, live with it. You're not getting gifts from me. Phil, I'm not going to get you anything this holiday season.
I don't want anything from you.
You don't.
I'd be mad if you got me a gift.
Yeah. I'll be mad if you get me a gift.
I
was
won't. Don't worry.
I was going to get you a Star Wars Christmas sweater, and now I'm not because I'm upset you're not going to get me something.
Oh, I take
My
it
uncle
back.
Mike on my mom's side said one time, if I can't drink it or eat it, I don't want it. And I think that's perfect.
Perfect.
That's
I
perfect.
feel like the older you get, the more that is how
That
it
is
goes.
100% true.
Yeah, people. It was just my birthday, and my family just got me like cake, and then they're like, "Here's some cookies, and then here's some chocolate covered pretzels, and here's a cupcake." I was like, "Holy shit!
You guys got it.
I'm gonna
You
get
nailed it.
diabetes. Here's some whiskey to wash it down. Perfect."
That's great.
And so
Yeah.
I do not like the holiday season for many reasons. There's plenty of nostalgic reasons that I like to do it. I do own a home in the suburbs, Cal. I don't know if I'm going to put lights up. Probably not.
Oh, what's your HOA say about that?
Do they get? I don't know. I don't talk to them.
I'm sure there's something in there like, well, you have to.
You have to if you don't.
Yeah.
Now, what about you, Phil? You put up lights, I bet.
I had lights up before Thanksgiving.
Nice.
You're one of those guys.
And my HOA is usually pretty strict, but they were fine with it. They
Were they?
don't care what you do for Christmas. I think they're all about it.
Are there HOAs in this world that force you to put up decorations?
Oh, guaranteed.
Really?
Guaranteed, yeah.
I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
I'm
There's
not
some
doing it.
neighborhoods.
I'm not a good suburban homeowner. I would tell you that right now. It's not looking good over there.
I don't like the,
I'm too busy.
It's Christmas or whatever, so you have to. I'm like, no, it's days off.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to do anything. No.
Anything.
No.
Again, I would defer if my kid says, "Hey, I'd love to put up some lights." I'd be like, "All right, for you, I'll do anything."
Yeah.
But like, I'm not inclined to go out and do all that.
Yeah.
We'll
And I'm a good helper outer. I like if I have a job, I'll be happy, much more happy to go do that job for you, mom or grandma or whoever. But the reality is like, this holiday is not for me.
Yeah. Thanksgiving is for me.
Like you guys have a lot of grandchildren and great grandchildren, and that's what the focus is on, and that's great. And so why don't I'll just steer clear and come see you on our non-busy times, and then we can actually hang out and chat and catch up, and then
I'm into it.
yep.
Phil, did your children did you shower them with gifts?
I wouldn't call it a shower. Get them each a few things. Yeah.
You guys go
A sponge bath of gifts.
a sponge.
Yes,
I was trying to
exactly.
think of another. Yes, a trickle of
A
gifts.
moist washcloth. Yeah.
Yes, sort of a waterboarding of gifts.
No, is that not the opposite?
Delete that. Delete that from the show. I'm not waterboarding children.
What is the big gift? That's something I am always interested in.
Well,
It's like, what is
we
like the
rely
big
on
gift?
Santa for the big gift. But Santa usually, it's usually one big gift from Santa, and then their mom and myself handpick like 3 or 4 smaller things.
Take care of the
from
socks
us.
and underwear.
Yeah.
I got socks and gloves every year of my life until I was 18 from someone in my family. I remember as a kid telling them, like, don't worry about it. Like, I got somebody for that. Like, my mom has the whole inventory list of what I got and I don't got. So I'm good. Like, just give that money to somebody that needs it. But no, the gift giving is
Yes.
it's an intense tradition.
Yeah,
also
the
can
wheels
do that.
fell off real hard on the gift giving side of things for me because I was like, like knickknacks, like framed pictures and things. And I'm like, yeah, it's very thoughtful. It's great. But I'm like, I live in my truck. I'm like, I'm like, you guys can either hang on to this or I have to take it to Goodwill now.
It's practical. I appreciate that.
With your gifts, could you also get me a storage unit? I'd pay for 6 months rent,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Well, we got a lot to get to. Here. We're gonna last week or maybe one of these weeks we talked about a term. Have you ever heard this term, Cal, for a small buck called a slingshot buck?
Oh, really?
The old slingshot.
I can see that,
see
but
what
no,
I'm
I've
getting
never
at?
seen it like in.
You got the slingshot. You got
Yeah.
Forky. Did you have any other names? We got a couple people write in. One dude actually, Kyle Herzog, actually drew a T-shirt that I don't even understand what it is, so I'm not going to explain it. But he had a bunch of different ideas for what we would call small bucks. You got any other names? Any lingo for a small buck? You mean spike buck, forky buck?
Oh, no. I mean, yeah, but they're like in kind of the moment thing. It's not like something I would, because I shot a small buck this year at the end of the season. And, but I'm like, oh, there's a dinker,
Dinker. That's a
Yeah.
good one. Little dinker.
Yeah.
Little feller.
which is just unfortunate. Like, I hesitate to say it because it sounds derogatory,
Yeah.
but it's like very happy. Like, I'm going to eat that buck and I'm going to give my elk to my dad because that's what he thinks is like the best meat is elk meat. So,
I'm gonna have this delicious little fella.
yes, exactly.
Some other things. There's a lot of stuff that's come up. Last week we had Maggie on. Was that last week? That wasn't even last week. I don't even know what week.
I think it was. Maggie
No.
and Joe.
Maggie and Joe last week. Thanks, Phil. Episode 91. Maggie told us about her first deer.
Sweet.
I was just binge listening to Cal's Weekend Review yesterday while I was doing some stuff around the house.
Thank you.
Caught up on all the ones I missed over the last month or so. And you were talking about philosophies about taking new hunters.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't tell the story of our new hunter in here you took that got her first buck, but you kind of gave your philosophies for how to set these things up for success because they are quite they're fraught with a lot of things you can do wrong
Oh,
from
yeah.
a mentor standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we have somebody in the room here, Phil. It's Phil, who's going to be a new hunter soon. In 2020, we're putting the Phil Goes Hunting plan into full action.
Love it.
Full action. We don't know what we're going to do yet, but it's going to be great. So having you here, we need to interview Phil about what he's feeling and try to help him get prepared for what's to come. So I figured you'd be the perfect first person to kind of figure out what hunt we might want to do and how we might want to set old Phil up here for ultimate success in the field.
Yeah, I guess
I'm Remy Warren.
Honestly, I'm ready to hear it.
we'd start with your goals. It's like why would you want to go hunting? Like what do you want to get out of it?
All right, give it to us, Phil. Why do you want to go hunting? I'm making you go.
Yeah, that's reason number one. I don't know. Reason number two is that it's just, I guess it's the older I get, the harder it is to kind of find new experiences, And this is something that I feel like I'd like to imagine it would be new, like exciting and new and fulfilling in its own way. But I guess I'm not going to know until I get out there. So I'm not really compelled, but I guess I'm curious is the word.
Curious.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Not unwilling.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you do it if you didn't work here? If you
I 100%, I can say no, I would not. Yeah. And it's just because, I mean, I've told the story 100 times on various podcasts, but it's just I didn't grow up with hunting, and I don't know until I started working here. I didn't really know any hunters, so I'm sure I never would have done it. So yeah.
Yeah. So would you say like you want to try to kill something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time thinking about it. Like
I don't at all. I mean, like I'm trying to think because I try
You've
to
been
put myself.
practicing with stray cats in the alley behind the house.
No.
Just 3 or 4 a week.
can't even get them in the microwave anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard because I haven't really. I'm sure it'll become more of a reality next year, but I haven't really thought down and kind of put myself in that headspace yet. But yeah, it's like I said, I'm not really compelled to do it yet, but I'm willing to try something new. And it's like everyone here always it seems to put a lot of thought into it and do it for the right reasons. And I don't think I could choose a better experience than having mentors here at Meat Eater. Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, the hard thing is for the mentor especially is truly just like focusing on this is the time that I have dedicated to help another person out, and really separating yourself and saying like I am just here to facilitate this first and foremost. And that takes a lot. And, I know a lot of folks that I know that just aren't really up for that task, if they're being honest with themselves, which is hard to do.
Well, it takes an incredible amount of maturity on a lot of levels. And we had Maggie and Joe Farinado in here, and Joe talked openly about like, I could have shot the buck. I could have shot it 10 times. And when he was talking to me about it, I'm like, and he's in his mid-20s. He's fired up about hunting. That's all he cares about.
Yeah. That's
all he wants to do. For him to be able to separate that enough to get Maggie a good experience is a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to do it the way that you talk about doing it takes lots of maturity.
Yeah, but the reality is too is like I don't think I've ever taken a first time hunter out when I haven't put an elk in the freezer. So like archery season, put an elk in the freezer. Once that's done, like absolutely more than game to go out and call or get and then dedicate some time to the first time hunter setup. So and then the other part is just that whole honesty factor with yourself over and over again, and recognizing all these things that you've come to take for granted, which is just the sheer gravity of the situation. And we saw that a little bit this week out on the back 40 with Anna Borgman, who's somebody who has dispatched domestic livestock as a butcher, and we've led up to this first time hunt of hers. And then, Mark Kenyon's got a deer hanging in his barn, and you could just see like all of a sudden, like we just sighted in a muzzleloader, which absolutely new experience.
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit of firearms experience there, but certainly nothing like that. And then it's like, oh, and here is what you're after. And you could just see like the wheels really turn, the eyes widen a little bit. Like she like reaches out and grabs the buck by the ear kind of fondly. And it's like, oh boy, like really, like, oh yeah, here it is.
Some emotions.
Yeah. And it should be that way. And it is being honest with the gravity of the situation. Firearms are freaking big, scary, super intimidating things for people who did not grow up with firearms.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just absolute deal. And you don't want to jump past that fact because you can die. And that first timer can have a life-altering experience in the absolute negative way, if all of a sudden they cause harm to themselves or somebody else, in just a lapse of cognition, right? Just a total, well, I thought the safety was on. I didn't remember that there was a round in the chamber, all the gajillion little things. And something that I have noticed and picked up on is when we were young, Ben, I'm guarantee you were this way. And Lakata put this in a really funny way too, where it's like, well, you know, something that I've noticed is like when I was growing up, when it is your father or your uncle, and you're this young child, they absolutely harass the shit out of you on gun safety.
Watch your muzzle.
In a way that you would never speak to an adult.
Yeah.
And you're not in a position in life where you're speaking back to people. I mean, you just aren't.
Especially those figures in your life.
Absolutely.
They're going to be like, shut up, Dad. Like, it's not going to happen.
It's not like, I got it.
Yeah, I got it.
It's like,
Dad.
oh, really?
Well,
You get your ass back in the truck.
I've
Like,
experienced a lot of this in my life where you have someone either that's a veteran hunter that just isn't paying attention that day or isn't used to that situation, or a new hunter, and then that person goes away. You get in the truck and somebody goes, "Oh, did you see the terrible muzzle control?" I'm like, "Well, you should speak up. Don't tell me in the truck. Tell that person in the moment. They got to know."
Oh man, absolutely.
Because I was half and half guiding a hunt in Texas when I lived down there, and a guy totally had an accidental discharge on his turkey shotgun in the middle of the morning. I'm explaining, he's pointing it luckily in the air.
Yeah.
But all he would have had to do is drop it down and point it towards me, and I'd be dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was explaining to him, like, the turkeys roost over here, and we're going to go down this road and drop down in the bottom, and boom! I was like, all right. Okay.
That last
friend.
part got you excited.
Like, yeah, we're not going to see anything now. But that, I've had a couple instances like that. And so you think it's far away, but it's not. It's close.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, Lakata put it, he's like, it's not really abuse, but it kind of is.
A little bit.
Like when that figure and you're a small child is like, hey, all the time. And again, we just don't speak to adults that way. But it is so hardwired into how I operate at this point, and I know it wouldn't be if it weren't for that. And so that is something, if you are taking out any adult as a first-time hunter, like that is some, people don't like conflict. People don't like, frustrating situations or tense situations. Like you have got to get over that, and you've got to say, hey, up front, I am going to be reminding you of this entire time.
Yeah.
Like that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm happy to carry the firearm for you if you feel uncomfortable with this scenario, but that's how it's going to be. Yeah. There's a lot of those moments, right? Like gun safety is one of them, but there's this other thing like dealing with life and death. How much do we want to talk about it? I don't want to sit down and lecture Phil about life and death for an hour before we go hunting. I feel like that's Phil probably wouldn't enjoy that.
And we're all thinking like this needs to be enjoyable.
Yeah,
right.
You don't want to be like, well, Phil, this is about our human existence. We are but a virus on the land.
Yes, but
thanks, Ben. I'm a 30-year-old man.
Now let's go hunting. Like
I have children, Ben.
Yes, I have children. I'm raising them. I've read books.
But like have that first-time hunter feel like if you are successful, like feel that wound channel that a bullet creates.
Yeah,
like that's impactful shit right there.
Well, how many times have you run into? I've taken a number of new hunters where everything seems okay until the moment the animal drops within sight. You walk up to it and it's still twitching.
Yeah,
like the nerves are still firing off. The muscles are still twitching, which sometimes happens for quite a while. Yep, depending on how freshly deceased the animal is. I've seen people freak out at that. I think it's one, it's a foreign thing, and two, if you've never killed something, you want it to go clean. And I've had multiple people go, shoot it again. And I did that as a kid. I was like, Dad, shoot it again. And he did, shot this deer in the neck that he had already just crumpled. That's something to deal with. And I wonder if you have any opinions on why it is like that. Why is it that a lot of these new hunters get in that situation and they see it and they just want that movement to stop?
Man, it's just... It takes being around a lot of death to be comfortable with death and knowing what it is. Like knowing when, when that animal is passed, right? And when Sam shot her buck, it was dead. Like it took a couple of jumps on adrenaline because it was on alert chasing that doe, and it was dead. But when I started skinning out the ham, all those muscles in the ham were twitching, you know. We like things to be, black or white, crisp, clean. It's alive or it's dead, and there's nothing in between. There is, as far as like that animal being alive, yes, that's gone. But there's all these muscle firing off and things like that, and blood isn't being pumped, but it does flow. And that's not stuff that's like explained in the movies.
No, and then you're also oftentimes in a situation where you want to say, look, there's a myriad of ways this goes wrong, right? In terms of the animal.
Yep.
For us, we're going to keep it tight. We don't want anything to go wrong in terms of us. The two people, and you said in your podcast, it's almost always better to just have two people, and I agree with that 100%. One-on-one is almost always better. So assuming you have two people, you're like, hey, look, we're going to keep safe. We're going to be safe. We're not going to do anything stupid. We're not going to go climbing up a hill we shouldn't be going up. We're not going to swing this muzzle around. But on the animal's end, there's so many bad things that can happen.
Yep.
But you have to one, try to address that. Be like, because I've run into new hunters that didn't think of it, that just been looking around on social media and had only seen big dead animals and never thought of the work that goes in. But then, when it comes to the terminal part, terminus of the whole experience, holy shit, I shot something in the guts. Now I got to deal with that. So I think of all the things to address before you go hunting, that's one thing at least to say. It's like, look, there's a lot of ways this can go bad. We don't want that to happen, but it does happen. And if it happens to you, we'll deal with it. But let's just go out knowing that's in the cards.
And then that is like you do your absolute level best to mitigate that situation by the setup, right? Like you're not, again, like you're taking yourself out of it and you're focusing on what is best for that first time hunter, and what's best, I don't care what they say, what is best is being in a spot where that animal is going to come to you somehow, some way. And it doesn't need to be a blind or a tree stand. Like I have many, many spots where it's like, listen, we sit here long enough, something's going to come out. And then you can control all the other things where it's like, you're going to be set up, right? So it's not like popping the shoulder off your rifle really quick, getting into a shooting position, finding a rest. It's like, no, we've been here hopefully for a couple hours. We're talking about what we're seeing. We're talking about wind direction. We're talking about how to glass. And then it's like, okay, animals are starting to move. You should probably get ready. Go ahead, put a round in the chamber, make sure the safety's on. Okay, here they come. And you're controlling, the thing that I love about hunting is there is no end to the variables. And I think an absolute foundational part of getting a first-time hunter set up for success is controlling what variables you can, right? So it's like you have that rest in place, and there's so much time, and you got to provide time, which is the hardest part, to practice all of this stuff, that it doesn't have to happen in the moment, because there's just so much. And that's why I think that one-on-one is so critical, because, man, we just don't have the ability to retain all of this information, especially when you put somebody in the position of doing something for the first time, something that's outside their comfort zone, something that can be stressful. So you have to be telling yourself that, and again, set that up ahead of time and be like, listen, I'm going to be repeating myself a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just important.
So Phil, if you had to pick of all the hunts that we've spoken of, what would you pick? Because you have a whole year of 2020. So any season that you want, the whole you pick.
Yeah, I know. I don't.
Or we could pick for you.
Exactly. I think that's what I would say, because I don't know. I have zero experience with everything. So I don't know what you guys would think would also like kind of a good balance of what difficulty it should be versus the experience itself, the environments.
Turkey hunting's great.
How are you with dengue fever?
Yes.
Please elaborate.
Turkey hunting's always a good one because
Yeah.
it's interactive. You're moving around, but you're not, unlike, say, spot and stalk mule deer hunting, the animal is almost always coming to you. So you're still moving around. You're still mobile. You're not sitting in a tree stand all day just looking for one thing. But you still, no matter what, if you're doing it right, you're in a situation where you are calling the animal to you and you get to make that choice as to when and how it goes down. Of course, if it all goes right, it's not perfect. But as Cal's saying, mitigating the circumstances where their failure could occur, turkey with a shotgun is, I've missed. Other people, you miss. But again, compared to a 150-yard shot with a rifle, I feel like it's a little more. That those chances to fail are a little bit more mitigated in that circumstance.
And it's exciting too.
I love it.
And it allows for some downtime during the day to work on a bunch of stuff. And that's the biggest failure I see. The biggest issue is like, I'm taking somebody out to get something, or I got them this.
That was my favorite thing you said in that podcast. I'm like,
So focused on the end
thank
result.
God somebody said that. I got him a deer. Oh boy.
It's a failure, man. You focus, like there has got to be that failure time. There's got to be that slow time, or else you just do not have the amount of time to, do anything for that first time hunter that they'll be able to replicate the next season. And if you're not getting them in a spot where they can at least go out and try, then it's just like you're not providing much. And I've got so many bad examples from folks that have told me their stories and like the most proud, look at what I did for hunting type of ways where I'm just like, man, I would be shocked if that kid, that adult, that whoever even buys another hunting license. Because you took all you could have empowered them to be hunters, and instead you just had them be a trigger puller, and that's it. So you remove them from the situation as much as possible. So like the timing is critical. The one thing that I did this year that I absolutely have not done in the past, but this is probably like the best thing I could recommend going forward. Because think of all the emails you get and the emails that we get into Meat Eater and Ask Cal. Is like, hey, I'm a first-time hunter. Like, where do I go? How do I start, right? So what I did this year is I took my first-time hunter to places I had never been. I was like, okay, like I'm learning. I'm going to try to relay as much information as I'm taking in as why I think this spot's going to be good or be bad as we go through it. So just think of that. Like, you're not like assuming about, you're like, well, I've never been here before. And Sam got super sick of me saying like, but anything could happen. This is what I think could happen over here, but anything could happen.
But that's
right?
hunting, right? If you were to take somebody, well, I know that there's a bear hanging out right here. I know there's a big elk right here.
Yeah.
We're going to go there. We're going to see him. It's just if it works out.
Yeah, and it crosses
That's not hunting.
so much of your thinking off the list
Yeah.
that you could be imparting that knowledge onto a first timer because you're like, well, this is exactly what's going to happen in this spot because I've hunted it 1,000 times. And by the way, you can't come here. Ever, right? And so that was the big thing is, I was like, what the coolest part about this, Sam, is like now you and I have a spot. I'm like, turns out both of these spots were really good.
Do not.
I'm like, you
do not now. You don't share it.
I'm like, you do not share this. Like, this is our spot. I'm like, if I come here without you, I'll be calling you and just be like, hey, just so you know, I'm going, and then I'm going to give you kind of the feedback on the spot when I get back.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to have that knowledge. I'm like, but you don't take anybody here without me.
I love it.
I'm like, or if you do, you let me know. Like, that's like the deal. But you have a spot now.
If you're coming at it from a mentor side, I feel that you're going to learn as much having to articulate the things you normally wouldn't articulate.
Oh,
you're going to learn how to understand, well, why is that turkey gobbling when I call? What is this call? Why is this? What about this cadence? Why this? Why cluck now? Why purr now? Why yelp now? Why is he in that tree? Why is he flying down that direction? Why is he using this part of the ridge to come down? Why when he hit the ground did he shut up? Just in turkey hunting, you can answer all those questions. Normally, that dialogue's in your head.
Yeah.
That's an inner dialogue where you're like, I think he might.
The first hunt that we did, never at any point did we have ammunition in the firearm. Like, just turns out we weren't ready for that. And you tell that to folks who are like, well, you got to go someplace where they're going to have a reasonable chance of success. And it's like, ultimately, that's important because it's less time for the mentor if you kill something the first day.
Yeah.
Right? But I'll tell you right now, the best thing that could happen is you do not have that success, because the more time that you can spend, the better that person's going to be the following season. Guaranteed.
Yeah, and for folks that work here, Phil, you're included in this because you work here. We're going to probably film you or be making content about you. Poor Maggie. I mean, come on, man. Yes. Maggie and Tracy, the first time they've ever had to wrestle with this stuff was on camera, and then we made it into a story for Netflix. That, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do, but it puts a lot on those new hunters.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you, recapping these hunts as we did, these people have never hiked at all with a rifle on their shoulder. Never. Let alone on variable terrain where there are no trails. And it's just another example of taking something for granted.
Yeah.
I could damn near sleep with that shoulder, with that rifle on the shoulder. It's just I throw it on, just like my hat.
Yeah.
And it's hey, this thing is a pain in the ass to walk around with. It is so awkward. I feel off balance. It's yes. And you look off balance, but eventually you will figure that out. But It's a great reminder, and so
it's a great reminder that this stuff, it doesn't come all at once.
No,
it's a small step, then another small step. Every once in a while, you have a hunting season where you figure something out that's profound to make you either a better hunter or better able to handle the shit that happens when you're hunting. Every once in a while, you'll have one of those moments or one of those years where everything goes wrong or everything goes right. And you learn something that you can carry on. But usually it's tiny little things that you pick up over time. And then when someone comes and says, how do I do this? You just unload all of those small incremental learnings on them I know everything. But really, it's every little minute of every day that you spend hunting is a building block towards being a mentor. So we're going to do it for you, Phil. We'll pick something cool for you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like a dud because you guys keep asking me questions, and I'm I don't know, I'm game for anything.
But that's also okay.
It's 100% true. I don't have any expectations. I don't know what kinds of, if I'm going to enjoy it or not, even how I'm going to feel about taking a life. I could not feel great about it, and but I'm completely willing and excited to try it. So,
some people come into it
the attitude is
some people come into it I've read 30 books, I've listened to all the podcasts, I'm ready to go. Other people are I really just want to do this. Can you take me? I don't have the time. I'll do the podcasting and the reading after I've done this once and realize I really want to do it again. Other people have already dived into the idea prior to the action. And so it's willingness being the only requirement in my book.
Oh, absolutely, man. And all you got to do is be able to appreciate being outside. You got that. Hunting will show you how to really appreciate that stuff because it just adds some different meaning to it. And I'll go to bat on that statement, that completely unprovable point I just made.
Yeah, we're kind of proof of it,
Yeah.
It's empowering to know things and then have your choices matter in the outdoors. If you go left on the trail or right on the trail, give a shit. You might take a little bit longer, but when you're out hunting, every choice matters. Depending on what your outcome is. If your goal is to get something and eat it, every choice matters. And so if you're just riding a bike, those choices just lead to a little bit longer of a trip, maybe.
Yeah.
But in the case of going outside and making choices, hunting is the way to experience reality.
I was laughing too because I was getting my land navigation skills
Cool.
questioned several times. And I've been lost a lot. That's valuable time in the woods, man. It's also like, well, how do you know about? It's like, well, spent a lot of time failing. A lot of time is taking the wrong direction.
You develop principles and philosophies like I'm not going to go downhill unless I absolutely have to.
Right.
Because you know what? In these mountains, that doesn't make any sense.
I was talking to some search and rescue guys, and they're like, little kids always go uphill. I'm like,
Little kids.
yeah. So
always
maybe
go uphill.
you do all this time in the woods, and then and it's just to get back in touch with your mammalian brain. You're being like, nope, get up high. Yeah.
I can see from up there. Smoke signals.
Yeah.
All right, Phil. Well, I'm excited for your 2020 journey,
Me too.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
fun.
Yeah.
and we will document every last bit of it, my friend.
Can't wait.
I know you're excited.
We're
Well,
really going to change that home recipe situation too. Like you're going to be busting out all sorts of stuff.
oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Probably stock. You're gonna be making stock.
Man, my wife's been making stock like nonstop, just like chicken and turkey stuff. But the house always smells incredible.
Oh, it's great. Stock is like the best smell.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
should do stock candles. Why would we come out meat eater candles? Just like bone stock.
my buddies were
It's a $1
making
million
fun of me
idea.
for the Cows Week in Review product line. They're like, "You're going to get sponsored by Yankee Candle,
Cal's Week in Review candle.
sawdust."
Cal's Week in Review candle. Smells like desperation. Another week to turn in that show. We got to get it out there.
Yeah.
Well, we had talked about, we have Tovar Cerulli on.
Awesome! Great conservation writer.
Great writer, great conservationist. We tend to talk about his book, Mindful Carnivore, most of all, but we went way past that in this conversation. It was a great one. Specifically, there's a couple points that came up that were important for me. One of them was, I feel like that I am maybe the living embodiment of having having been two types of hunters in my life. And you might be this way too, Cal. Early on in my life, I was what I would call a normal hunter. I hunted because my dad did. I fell in love with it because my dad showed it to me. We didn't think too much about it. It was go out, shoot a deer, whatever was legal, go back home, skin it out, take the back straps out, fry them up and eat them, make hamburger out of the rest. It wasn't really, we didn't think about conservation. We didn't think about life and death too much. We didn't think about all these other entanglements that are part of this show and your show, Cal, and all the stuff we do at Meat Eater. So for the first maybe, I want to say 10 years, 12 years of my hunting life, it was just kind of a pastime. It was a sport. It was a thing we did. And then later on in my life, as I traveled around, met people like you and Steve and started to think about other ways to do it, I became more of like an adult onset discoverer of these things, conservation, the principles of our North American model of wildlife conservation, all these things that I just didn't even know for the first 15 years of my hunting life. And so that's something that we talked about with Tovar that I found to be something I think a lot of folks that listen to our stuff, that have lived their life hunting may think too. Like I became a better hunter later in life, but I'm glad the first 15 years happened because I got to just be a kid and appreciate how fun it is and how cool it is to be out there with your family doing really fun stuff that has some benefit. But then later in life, I started thinking about it probably too much. But I'm glad that both those things happened because I got to kind of appreciate both things.
Oh yeah, man.
So that's something that I think somebody like Phil that goes, like, you're never going to get to just be a 15-year-old kid doing it. But there's a lot that you bring to the table as an adult onset hunter, whatever we call them.
Yeah, your ability to just go out and shoot a brick of 22 ammo and kill 1,000 gophers in a day and not think anything of it.
Yeah.
That you'll never experience that, my friend.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do it anymore.
I
God.
But that you'll hear it when we talk to Tovar, but that concept goes off in a bunch of different weird ways. That exact thing. When you're a kid, you can shoot a bunch of robins. In fact, somebody who works here's kid got in trouble with a BB gun recently. I'm not going to put anybody's names out there, Steve. But that, like, when you have that as a kid, that's a pretty precious time you come to figure out later in life, because then you got to wrestle with all the moralities and the ideologies and shit that we talk about on the show. So that was something pretty profound for me to think about, those two versions of myself, and kind of when I started to become the second version, which I am now. When that maturity and adulthood kind of and responsibility took hold, and I started to try to be better and think about it in a better way. So something that hopefully you guys will get from that conversation. I enjoyed it. But before we get there, Phil, we're only doing not so sharp moments to the end of the year, folks.
Oh, man, I'm going to miss it.
I'll miss it too. We might bring it back next year. We don't know. But we're only going to do them till the end of the year. And so we only have, 3 left. 3 left. So write in now to thc@themeateater.com if you want to win a Work Sharp Field Sharpener. Many, many, many of you have. We haven't picked our last couple yet, and so you still have a chance to win. So if you haven't written in to thc@themeateater.com, please do, with your not-so-sharp moment, to remind you it's something dumb you've done outdoors. That is it. And the better your writing, the better your prose, the better your chance of getting on. Right, Phil? Is that it?
Yeah, there have been some really good storytellers
good
that I've written in.
Really good. Not too
Impressive.
long.
But not too short. Just the right length.
Just the right length. Okay?
To the point.
To the point.
Uh-huh.
All right, play the jingle, Phil.
Work sharp, not so sharp moments, sharp so you don't have to be.
Won't you marry me, Phil? I love you so.
This new one's so much better.
All right. Bye, Cal.
Bye, thank you.
Get back to work.
Good luck, Phil.
See ya.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Trevor Carter is this week's winner. He's got a story for us. He said, "Hey, y'all, I was a pretty keen duck hunter back in college. Gap years, changing majors, switching universities. Man, I had a lot of time on the water. Around about my third junior year, I found a piece of marsh while out catfishing that looked like it would hold some ducks come winter. Winter came, as much as it ever did in South Carolina, and the weatherman promised a midweek cold front. Thinking that everything else would be working, we decided to skip class and drive out to the lake. We left early or late, depending on what's in your drinking cup, arriving at 3 a.m. to the mud strip landing. My mercury had quit again, like a hound suspiciously coming up limp every time it was cold out. So we were going to have to tack slowly across the open water with a borrowed trolling motor. Anybody who's been a young dude in college and not had a crappy trolling motor on their boat doesn't know life. So I'm with you, Trevor. It was cold, rainy, and the battery died 100 yards into the trip. We brought oars, but not the knowledge of how to use them. The old, squared-fronted John boat was much too wide for one man to row, and we cut a few circles that frayed our tempers before we straightened it out. And by cut a few circles, Phil, he just means they rowed around in a circle.
Got it.
With an hour left before sunrise, we arrived at a likely-looking spot and called it good. We tossed out a few dozen decoys, our excitement bulldozing past practicality and good sense, using up the last scraps of energy we had from our only hour of sleep and a pot of coffee. We waited. 10 minutes before shooting light, the wood duck started flying. Whistling wings had us scrambling to load guns and stare holes through our watch dials. Despite the barrage sounding from the marsh around us, we waited until, finally, the clock struck legal. Nothing. Empty skies grew hazy and reddening eyes as another enthusiastic sunrise brought disappointment. Time passed, and an awareness passed over the boat. We all looked southeast to see a lone duck flying in. It was a big duck, a general term used for anything that wasn't a wood duck or hooded merganser, and we all knew it. My calls hung forgotten around my neck as the bird flew in on a string. I had to squint hard through the sleep and morning sun, but I tracked the iridescent green head as it approached, slow and fast. As soon as it broke the perimeter of our decoys, feet inches from the water, I raised and pulled the trigger. My pellets tore through the water all around him, but he didn't go down. My next shot followed on his heels of the first, but I'm clearly behind. The third round cracked hard against my shoulder, a 3.5-inch surprise for my early morning shell grab. But the duck doesn't go down. I tried to reload, but he was gone. I realized as I struggled to stuff a shell backwards into my shotgun that I was the only one to shoot. What a realization, Philip. I turned, ready to put my friends to the question, but stopped short at the expressions on their faces. They looked at me like I had cancer, despair written plainly in their eyes. It did not last. Pain turned quickly to mirth as the inquisition began. What were you shooting at? It was just one mallard that flew in, right? Why were you shooting so low? There was no denying, even though I tried. Somehow, through the fog of exhaustion, I managed to shoot a tube full of 12-gauge steel at the reflection of a duck in the water as it flew overhead. My shot, so well executed to my eyes, were about 40 yards low. Not the kind of shooting that's easy to live down. At least, I had the windage right. If I have a more embarrassing story, I'd probably have repressed it. Thanks for reading, Trevor Carter. Well done, Phil. Play the jingle.
Work sharp, not so sharp moments, sharp so you don't have to be.
That's pretty good, man.
Yeah, I like it. I wonder, I mean, how much light was there when this was happening?
It had to be some. Full. Yeah, it was full.
Okay.
Full daybreak.
Yep.
So there's no excuses.
So when he's shooting at the water,
just imagine.
I'm sure there's ripples everywhere. Like, was he? I've never been in his shoes before. Is this something that could happen to somebody?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
It depends on the angle the duck was flying, but boy, that would be a hard one to pull off.
All right,
because you're normally your eyes are trained on the duck, and like there's a moment when it's time to shoot. That's the excitement of duck hunting. The duck is flying in, you're waiting, he cups his wings, he's clearly committed to coming into your spread, and then you pick a moment, you say shoot. And so there's normally never a confusion such as this.
Okay.
But good job, Trevor.
That's why it's not so sharp.
It's not so sharp, and you're going to win a Work Sharp field sharpener. We'll send it right to your house. It'll be super great. So next time that you're wasting steel shot after a mirage, it's almost like he was in the desert and saw, oh my God, an ice cream truck. Very similar. All right, well, we're going to get to Mr. Tovar Cerulli. We'll travel all the way to Princeton University, the Princeton Library, to talk to Tovar a couple of weeks back. It was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy.
I guess I grew up on an older road, a pedal to the metal.
Tovar, how are you doing?
Wow. How are you?
Oh man, I can't complain. We're in the Princeton Library. I feel smarter just to be hanging out here.
Right? Right in town.
Right in town. Yeah, right in town in a kind of a weird place. But I guess an apt place to have a conversation such as we're about to have, and it seems like there's a lot of very smart, affluent people walking around here. Maybe some vegans. I bet there is.
No doubt.
No doubt. Can you quickly? I normally try to start this by describing our surroundings. These aren't very exciting surroundings. So you can give people a quick run through of who you are and where you're from. We'll save your book and some of your other work for later on, but just like your general background, where you're from.
So I grew up in New England, in New Hampshire and Vermont, and lived for a while in New York City, in and around my college years. And I've done a variety of things throughout my life on the work front: carpentry, forestry, freelance writing, consulting, a whole bunch of things. But have really gravitated toward work around conservation and different communities, environmental community, hunting community, and other communities, and their perspectives on our relationships with nature and the values and perceptions that we bring to that.
Yeah. I think one of the when we sit down for these conversations often, I think one of the things I want to make sure we always cover is, when was that moment where you remember first thinking, wow, I have some connection to nature. I have some interest in, some folks when they were a kid and they were looking at bullfrogs and wondered how this all worked. Some folks way later in life. For you, what was it? Was there a moment that you can remember where you thought, this is kind of who I am and what I want to do?
I spent so much time outdoors as a kid that I don't really remember a time when I wasn't sort of immersed in it. I was swimming, not long after I was walking, and catching bullfrogs and tadpoles not long after that, and learning to fish when I was pretty young. I was sort of always immersed in that. As I got older, I started to think more about different perspectives and different backgrounds and cultures and all of that sort of human dimensions of it. But the connection with the natural world, from picking blueberries to catching trout is, pretty ingrained in who I was from when I was pretty little.
Who in your life kind of helped push that forward? Was it your parents, or were there other folks in your life?
My parents were certainly supportive of all of that, of being outdoors and everything. My dad, for instance, wasn't particularly into fishing, but he had a good friend who had actually grown up in the Bronx and ended up getting really, connected to the outdoors. And so he became my fishing mentor when I was a kid. I would say, a lot of people were supportive, but on the fishing front in particular, my friend Willie was a big factor.
People who listen to this podcast know I had a Willie. My Willie's name was Bill Miller. We also called him Willie. It seems to me like there's a lot of people in our lives, whether for most of us as our parents. Of course, it was my dad, but if that wasn't the case, then I imagine a good parent finds some other outlet, some other person to kind of get you down the path you want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you, as you're, we're going to talk about your switch from vegan to hunter and in your book, The Mindful Carnivore. But do you remember what point in your life do you remember thinking about your consumption and wondering about death and wondering about that whole wonderful cycle that we now know to be so complicated?
I think as a kid, I just didn't question it. Wherever food came from, I ate it. And sometimes I was involved in it. I was catching fish or picking berries or whatever else. And it wasn't until like my late teens, maybe when I was 20, that I started to question it a bit and think about it and wonder about whether it was the health of, the healthfulness of that food, or the ethics of that food, or the environmental footprint of that food. So, the time in our lives when a lot of us start to question, like, who are we? What are we doing here? What does this all mean?
This is a time filled with angst and confusion, and, all the emotions. As you move through all this, I think we'll get to your switch to being a hunter. When does the introduction of veganism come, and when's the first time you saw that and thought, well, that looks pretty interesting, I might try it?
Yeah, it was a bit gradual in that I started to wonder, gee, how much of this kind of food, how much meat is healthy for me, and just think about diet a little bit. I knew vegetarians late in high school. My girlfriend was a vegetarian, and her family was vegetarian. So I was introduced to vegetarian food, and I was totally open to it. And I think the real pivot, I'd been away from fishing for a while. I'd been living in the city and whatnot, and I went fishing, and I hadn't killed my own food in a while, and I caught a trout and reeled it in, and as I killed it, there was just that moment of hesitation and doubt, like, I didn't need to do that. Like, I didn't need to eat that fish. I could have eaten something else. I could have had rice and veggies or whatever. And so I had been, thinking about my values and my path, and had actually done a little retreat in New York State with the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. He's talking about compassion, and they encourage vegetarianism, and
there's nothing that points you towards vegetarianism
right.
like Buddha.
Exactly, right? So I just thought about all that, and so that moment of killing that fish was sort of a turning point for me, where I started. For a while, I was vegetarian. So I'll try this. I don't need to kill other sentient beings to live. And then from that moment, the other sorts, I became interested in vegetarian philosophy, vegan philosophy, and realized the dairy industry has huge impacts on animals, and the egg industry. So I just started moving further and further away from all of those animal foods. And
what year was this?
So this would have been like 91. I was 20, so like 91.
Okay, so quite a while ago. I mean, I think that's a good point to stop and say, like, when you're in the vegan, in that world, in that mindset, and you're looking at the impact of your consumption. Mm-hmm. Did you develop your own community with other vegans? How did you, and obviously in 1991, you weren't logging on to some chat room or going on social media and sharing, proclaiming to the world your veganism. So it was probably a more personal thing at that point. We have, in this more modern, 2019 world, we are very likely doing it so we can share it it's going to be shared on Instagram or some social media as part of your life. But at that point, you just didn't have that. No,
you didn't have access to sort of the digital echo chambers that we have today, right? Whatever our perspectives.
Exactly.
So, I knew plenty of people who weren't vegetarian or vegan, but I also knew folks who were. I spent my last couple years of college right in New York City, and both among classmates and others, knew plenty of people who were vegan and vegetarian, and all of my, the ethics, the environmental questions, the health issues, all of the logics that I was bringing to it at that time all pointed me in, staying on that path. for that period of time.
Yeah, and I have been diving into veganism like you wouldn't believe. I'm interested in not only like its ideologies and how it's constructed, but also how it's growing. I was looking at some surveys and I had in my mind. We know that hunting is declining, right? We've talked about that on this show and probably in every corner of the hunting world recently. We know that it's declining. So I started looking, is the vegan lifestyle, the vegan diet, folks that are practitioners of this, is that growing while hunting is declining? So we can kind of lay bare what we're dealing with here in terms of these two types of not only diets, but this has become a lifestyle. It's become a way of thinking. I think on both sides. And I'll say that what we already know, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, when I was looking it up, about 4.5% of Americans actually hunt, and that's down right now, and that's down. That was 2017, and that's down from 7.3% in 1991. So that's about a 3% drop over all that time, which was when you started thinking about veganism, coincidentally. And then I was looking at, okay, what's the vegan thing? I looked at a couple of data points from this group called Global Data. They said from 2014 to 2017, which is only a three-year span, U.S. consumers identifying as vegan grew from 1% to 6% in that time. That's a 600% increase over that number. So if you were to just pull those apart, 4.5 or so, 4.4% of Americans hunt, around 6% of Americans are vegan, and the line graphs are going in opposite directions for those two things. So I think as we look at this conversation and talk about it, it's interesting to see what the dynamic there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting tangents off that. I mean, one is that vegetarianism in America is actually pretty old. Not so much veganism, but vegetarianism in America has, been here in various concentrations and forms since the 1800s, and has religious roots in large part. But there was actually, you and I were right before we started, talking about, vegan athletes and so on, and back when Teddy Roosevelt was, ironically, when Teddy Roosevelt was, this very prominent figure in conservation and the culture, vegetarianism was pretty strong too.
Yeah.
And its connections to, physical exercise and all. So today, yeah, there are these sort of trends, and I think that they aren't necessarily, at least in my experience and the conversations I've had with people over the years, they aren't as diametrically opposed as they necessarily appear on the surface. And there are some common threads and values that run through parts of the vegan community and parts of the hunting community that I think are hopeful. Looking forward.
We've addressed those, a lot of those here, and we'll continue to, because I think the most compelling thing about this is because these things seem diametrically opposed, but they're not really. There's some places where we diverge, right? There's some ideas where we just can't get together. But in general, like, we value animals. We want to make sure they're robust populations and all kinds of habitat. Like, we share a value system. We just disagree on how to get to where we want to go. But I think in North America, especially in the U.S., that's one of the most unique things we have going for us. We all value the animals in the same way. And we've done it. We've applied those same values to, like, non-native species like the pheasant and native species and other native species like the pronghorn, white-tailed deer, and things like that. So we're not, unlike other countries, shunning the non-natives and building up just the native species, like, for example, New Zealand. That's what they're on a mission to do right now. So there's just a lot of things. Well, we share a value system. We just don't. In my conversations with vegans and other folks that practice that, like, we just don't. It's the death and life thing that we just can't get around. We just can't get together on. And how did you? I mean, obviously, you were saying when you were a vegan, you were thinking about how am I participating in the death of these sentient beings, as is the popular term. Where was your mind then? I mean, do you feel like you were a better participant in consumption in society when you were vegan?
I don't think I was better. I mean, I was committed to causing the least possible harm. as I understood it.
Yeah.
And the least possible suffering, as I understood it. And those are noble goals.
Yes.
Right? To cause minimal harm, minimal suffering. And as I understood the world and my role in it, that was what made sense, was to just refrain from eating those foods, that act in itself. And also, there's the environmental dimensions that I felt were important reasons also to stick to a vegan diet. So I was sincere, and the values and motives behind it were good, and my perspective shifted. Right.
Yeah. Talk about that shift. I mean, I think that's something that obviously can be an example for a lot of people. I mean, we often hear people that go on vegan diets for ethical reasons. I think like 6 out of 10 vegans say that they're living this lifestyle and eating this diet for ethical reasons, like that. And so it's often that people will say that, but then they run into health issues. Like they run into low B12, low iron, a lot of things like that, joint issues, on and on. What was it for you?
The first step was that I realized that eating agricultural crops also had substantial impacts on all kinds of beings, from clearing whatever the previous habitat was to create a crop field, whether that's prairie or forest or whatever. You just wiped out a whole habitat to create, whether it's a monoculture or not. You just totally changed that habitat and displaced a lot of critters, and probably wiped out a bunch in the process. And then, pest control, so-called, whether it's deer or other animals, let alone pesticides and so forth. I'd started to read. There's a great book that you may be familiar with called Heart and Blood by Richard Nelson. Which I read, and I was still vegan. And I read this, and it was a fantastic book, amazing book about deer and our relationships with deer. And one of the things he documents is that deer are being killed in every corner of the continent to protect every crop we grow, practically. And I found that a little uncomfortable, right, as a vegan. But I still had this notion that I was like, well, okay, if you're out in the Midwest and you got these massive soybean fields, okay, they're killing lots of deer. And it was when I realized that, 3 miles down the road, the little local organic farm growing strawberries and salad greens, whatever, they were occasionally shooting deer and constantly smoke bombing woodchuck burrows and stuff also. And that brought it home to like, okay, there's a lot of gray here. So I was still vegan, right? But what those kinds of realizations started to do was to take those very sharp delineations I had drawn, like sharp black and white, hard edges of, plant good, animal bad in terms of food ethics, and it's like, okay, if this farmer who's growing the salad greens and strawberries that we're eating is having to kill deer to protect those crops, and then he and the guy who shot the deer are splitting the venison, like that venison and those strawberries are part of the same food system, right? There's no separation. So that was the first step for me, was just softening those hard ethical lines I had drawn. And then 2-3 years later, when some health issues started to crop up for me, I'd been vegan for close to a decade. I wasn't severely ill, but my immune system was not doing great. And my doctor, who is a Buddhist naturopath, not someone who is going to tout the all-American diet, but she had some blood work done and talked to me about my blood chemistry and some of what was going on with my health, and said, you might want to think about, adding some other foods, some animal foods into your diet. So my wife and my wife was vegetarian also and had been vegan. She sort of came along for the ride on veganism with me. She and I said, well, okay, we better do something a little different here. And so we first tried like having a little yogurt, and having yogurt after like almost 10 years as a vegan is like, it's a radical move.
Yeah, it's like dropping a bomb in your gut. Like, hey, look at this bacteria. Woo!
But I mean, psychologically, it's so some yogurt, some eggs, some wild fish. I started to experiment with that. And my body really responded well.
Yeah.
And then I started to think about, okay, what about participating directly again, like I did when I was a kid and I was fishing? And so I decided I'm going to pick up fishing again. If I'm going to be eating other creatures and dealing with the fact that I'm a living, breathing animal who also eats and has a footprint, whether that's in terms of agricultural cropland or the death of a particular creature, I have a footprint. I can't pretend I don't have any footprint here. Minimize it, make it sustainable, minimize suffering. Yes, great. And, I'm not invisible. I'm not like ethereal, right? I have a body. I eat. So I started fish again, and I didn't grow up hunting, but I started to just think about the possibility of getting engaged there.
Yeah. Did you you're very far from that when you're thinking of like an ethical vegan mindset. You're very far from, what I'll just do. I'll just kill something because that's better than what I've constructed here, which is something that I've heard multiple times on this podcast for folks that had been vegan and turned hunting. Like they realize the gray area that you just discussed there. They realize that that gray area is full of not only large scale agriculture, it kills animals, but also large scale agriculture is destroying this planet as much. I've talked to some folks recently in the regenerative agriculture world that believe that large scale plant agriculture is more harmful than large scale animal agriculture in some ways. And so then that gray area becomes full of these contradictions and conundrums and things you have to then go figure out.
Right.
So that's not uncommon to where you're headed, but it normally goes to hunting once you've kind of come out of that decision making process. Like, hey, I can't fool myself anymore. What do I do now? Hunting seems to be a natural, spasm, like a spasmodic way to be like, I got to go back and do this the right way and see if this feels better. Once you started hunting, I'm assuming you didn't just kill a deer on your first go around.
Heck no.
How long till you were comfortable that you could go in the woods? Like, did you just have a mentor? When was it that you felt like I can step in the woods and sit in a tree and hunt a deer?
Right.
Because I know deer was the first thing you killed. I mean,
well, I did actually do a little small game hunting. I did some small game first. Well, a couple thoughts. One is that I think one of the reasons it's a natural or a common move for some folks toward hunting is that one of the values that underpins ethical vegetarianism or ethical veganism is, I think, a desire and a commitment to recognizing what is happening, recognizing where your food comes from, recognizing that, some eggs come out of some pretty horrific factory, settings, and, chickens are treated horribly. Same thing with, some production of beef and pork and so on. And one of the common, I'd say, ailments that we have as a modern society is not knowing and not wanting to know.
Yeah. Not
just about our food, but about like just putting blinders on. Like, I don't really want to know how any of this is produced.
It's so much easier.
Whether it's my smartphone or my food or my clothes or my car, I just don't want to know, right? And once you start to know, it's uncomfortable. And then sometimes you have to make a decision about what you can do about what you know. So one decision is, I'm going to become vegetarian or vegan. And I think that same value underpins some hunters' choice to hunt, including most, if not all, of those who came out of being a vegetarian. Yeah. Like, I'm going to know what happens because I'm going to do it. Yeah. I'm going to be right there and deal with it and confront it. So I think there's a common motivation there.
It strikes me, the question I would ask too is, do you feel, because what you're talking about is a really complicated understanding now of where your food comes from, and you're being struck with this. I'm being lied to, manipulated. I'm being told this is healthy when it's not. I'm being told this is the way that our American diet works, and this is the way that I should be comfortable in eating this way. And you feel, I did this too when I started reading about factory farming and reading about the way that we get our meat, and even the word organic, the way that's been bastardized and thrown around. You feel a little bit angry, a little bit used, a little bit lied to, a little bit part of a big system in which you have no control. So then you start searching around for control. And one of the things that I've thought about when I've thought about veganism is that it becomes this like really religious idea almost. And I wonder if people aren't confronting this really hard truth and taking the first easy way out. Is that something that you would agree with? Or I'm just trying to explore like how you get from confronting this really basically terrible idea of the system that you're in. You want to weigh out immediately. And maybe veganism is just the intellectually easiest way to get out. But I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess my caution there would just be that I don't want to dismiss, right?
No.
Dismiss the people or the ideas that.
Like I said, I think we share so many values that it's silly. But I'm just trying to, break down the mechanics of how you go from facing this hard truth to getting to veganism and then off and coming back. I've seen that. I've seen that enough to know that's it's a small trend, but a trend nonetheless.
Yeah. I think that the very sort of relatively simple personal conclusion that we can draw, for example, like, oh, I didn't need to kill that fish, or I didn't need to eat that piece of factory pork, or whatever it is. Then I think we naturally look for ways to apply that more broadly, right?
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of, once we start to think that and look around and read and talk to people, we're going to find resonant ideas. Some of those are going to be veganism, but, I could just as easily at that point in my life, perhaps, come across, start to have a conversation with a really ethical hunter.
Yeah.
Because this is really important, like nutritional food for you, but you don't want to get it from that factory. Here, let me show you how. I could have gone a different direction, right?
Yeah.
And again, it would have been like, I don't know if that would qualify as like the easy way out, right? But it's a prepackaged, or not exactly prepackaged, but here's a set of ideas that someone else has already thought through and is going to help me.
Yeah, against my own point, like veganism is not easy.
No.
Just saying, I'm not going to eat any of this stuff that's readily available. I'm going to go in this whole new exploratory way to eat. That's not easy.
Right.
But I think
it can become fundamentalist.
Yeah.
So can hunting, right? So can anything,
Yes,
right?
very
It can
much
become
so.
We just know we're right.
Yeah.
And we're going to, and now here we're going to justify it,
the
in this 100
bias,
ways.
And that's what we were just talking about, that Game Changers documentary that I have so many emails about this thing. It seems to me like it's vegan propaganda, in a weird way. So I don't know, if that's just where we are as a culture. There's that side of the coin has an easier outlet to get things like that out into popular culture. I don't really know how that works, but certainly because veganism is on the rise and hunting is on the decline. If you were just to say like, hey, I think both of these are kind of in a weird way solutions to what we see as a massive a problem on a massive scale. Or responses to this stimuli of understanding that there's this big issue, this thing you're part of.
Right.
Then with that application, what are we doing here with the rise and the decline? Is it that hunting's PR agency sucks and that vegan's PR agency is great? Is it that? Is it just where people are being exposed? There's the political bend that most vegans are liberal. I can't remember I have to look up the numbers, but there's numbers saying like I think 11% of liberals are vegan and only 2% of conservatives. And that's like, where do you live? What's your community?
Sure. All these cultural factors.
Yeah, so I could keep going. I mean, more liberal people live in urban areas, more, and that's where kind of the centers of a lot of veganism. You're not going to Sheboygan and finding a bunch of ethical vegans. So I say all that to say, I mean, there's some exploration in there, I'm sure. Have you thought about all the things I just said?
Yeah.
All the randomness I just brought up.
I mean, I think that right now, in this, like just speaking for the U.S., I think it's true somewhat elsewhere in Canada and Europe and other parts of the world to some degree as well. But right now in the U.S., my sense is that a fairly substantial proportion of the hunting community and hunting media are not really tuned into like mainstream communication and values and like how to get this. They're starting to talk about local food, and that's happening, right?
Yeah.
So state wildlife agencies are starting to recognize that, and the whole R3 recruitment, retention reactivation is starting to tap into. We need to think about these cultural differences. We need to talk about values. We need to think about food as a primary motivator and use that message. But a lot of the sort of what has been the juggernaut of the hunting industry for recent decades is so oriented toward particular demographics and particular value systems and sort of repeating particular stories and images that just do not resonate with most of the public, right? And so out of touch.
Yeah, I've been
whereas the vegan, filmmakers who are making Game Changers or whatever else, are probably quite a bit more in touch with what's going to appeal and resonate with.
They clearly are.
Public.
I mean, I think they clearly are just by looking at where we are in the trends, and if we were to say level set these things, like say veganism is not great for the environment on a mass scale. We know that. I mean, we certainly could figure it out. Hunting on a mass scale wouldn't work either. But if we level set them as like both of them have good qualities, both of them have bad qualities, and then we start to examine why one's growing and one's shrinking, I think what you're saying is a huge part of it.
But one of the things, you've said that you've run across other people who, were vegetarian or vegan and got interested in hunting. I know folks who are vegetarian, but they'll eat meat if it's wild and if it's taken by a hunter they know and respect. So it's, that animal didn't come through a factory farm, the animal lived a wild life, and they trust that person, that hunter they know, to have conducted that hunt and taken that animal in a really ethical way. And so there's, this is totally sustainable in terms of environmental footprint, as long as it didn't, fly thousands of miles to take the animal, right? But if this is, something they took, within their normal, where they would be anyway, and they trust the ethics, that relationship between the hunter and the hunted, and that ethical dimension. There are plenty of people who are vegetarian and vegan, but because they're ethically and environmentally driven, will make an exception for that, and they recognize that as being within their value set.
Yeah,
and so there's that overlap.
Yeah, like if you're looking at it as a Venn diagram, I think that middle piece, the piece that is often focused on in that circumstance, is bigger than we think it is. Mm-hmm. And all we have to do is kind of talk about it enough where people are realizing we're like this. If you would look at veganism as a tool to better yourself, your diet, and the environment, and hunting as a tool to better yourself, your diet, and the environment, you can do both. Mm-hmm. Like it's right. Just if we would just erase the ideological battles here, which again I think most people get into hunting for much different reasons than vegans. More modern vegans get into veganism. I think maybe that's part of why more vegans are activists than hunters being activists, and part of the reason why that culture is more insular in hunting and less so in vegan circles. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there again, I'm making that up, but
right.
That's just what it seems to me.
Yeah.
As you try to kind of empirically look at what's going on with this stuff.
And the trick is, for me anyway, what I've tried to do over the years is to cultivate those conversations where people who are coming from all the different perspectives are welcome.
Yeah.
So it's not, this is hunting propaganda and this is, vegans are bad and wrong. No, this is a conversation where we can collectively think together, we're not going to try to necessarily change each other's minds, but give each other new insights and new perspectives. And, that takes a willingness on everyone's part to listen, not just to counter the other person's argument, right? But to really understand where they're coming from and get a sense of what are their values and recognize common values. And not be so defensive and protective of ourselves, right? Which, no matter where we are on these spectrums, a lot of us are.
Right, you live in that, you live in those echo chambers, and then when you're asked or confronted with something uncomfortable, there's this immediate pushback from the table. And I've gotten that when I've had vegans on and animal rights folks on, and bear advocates that don't want another grizzly bear killed for the next millennia. What I find is that if you can remain calm and collected and just work through these ideas, there always is common ground. There has to be. We're humans living in the same environments here. There has to be common ground. And so in this case, there must be too. But I wonder, have you seen kind of both sides of the coin, more modern in the hunting sense, as you look at and are possibly frustrated by kind of where the core hunting community is going? How do you articulate that? You're looking at the urban set of people that are in these urban environments. They do very much want to get outside and reconnect with nature. They yearn to eat better, but they just don't know this is a real option. They're thinking about trophy hunting when they think about it, so they're driven away from learning about it. I have my feelings on why that's true. Why do you think that's happening and things aren't bubbling as they probably should?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's probably maybe should be called like a micro trend, but there is growing interest. Just between, when I was trying to shop my book around, find an agent, find a publisher, which I'd never done before, we had to make a marketing plan. And so we had to look at other books in the genre broadly. And, there were some really thoughtful hunting books, Ted Karasoti's work and Richard Nelson's work and David Peterson's work that had come out in the previous, decade or two. But nothing really recent and nothing really focused, especially the recent ones, really focused on food and nothing about vegetarian. And most people who grew up hunting, Richard Nelson didn't grow up hunting, but a lot of these folks grew up hunting and who write these books. And I looked back a few years ago when I was giving a talk, thinking about the variety of books that I'd seen come out in and around the time that mine did. And I realized that just in this span of a few years, there was a slew of books, right? My book came out. Georgia Pellegrini's book, Girl Hunter, came out. Yep. Jackson Lander's book, Hunting Deer for Food, came out. Steve Rinella's book, Meat Eater, came out. Hank Shaw's book, Hunt, Gather, Cook, came out. There was just this pile. I think I'm missing. Lily McCallow's book, Call the Mild.
That's a great book.
So half a dozen books came out in this 3-year period.
That's a revolution.
And the only one of them was a lifelong hunter is Steve.
Yeah.
Everyone else who wrote these books were people who came to it as adults, and some of them who'd been vegetarian. So there's this, following the sort of beginnings of the local food movement and Michael Pollan's work. And, in the past 10, 15 years, there's been this spike in conversations and interest about hunting for food and all of that. So I actually think it is happening, and that people who, whether they're urban or rural or suburban, there is a spike, and it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna turn around the demographics of hunting in a dramatic way, the number of hunters in a dramatic way, but I think it's changing the conversation about hunting.
Yeah.
So it's not just it's all about trophy hunting. That's not people's image of what hunting, quote unquote, is.
Totally agree. Right? There's just there is those traditional core hunting things that you can go find. They're everywhere, and a lot of them are legitimate. But then you have this new crop of folks. I met Georgia Pellegrini 5 or 6 years ago when she was first getting into this, and then I read Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, and I read your book, and I remember thinking, whoa. And I started writing some stories for Peterson Hunting magazine about the Meat Eater revolution. And that was probably 2014 or 2013 when I wrote a cover story where we just had a big chunk of meat on a knife, and we said the Meat Eater Revolution, and we talked to Steve and Georgia and other folks. I was recognizing it even then that something was happening, but I think your point is kind of where I sit now is like, does this trend, whether it's a micro trend or something that will become more macro, does this trend have enough steam to kind of change the tide of the overall hunting numbers or hunting's overall cultural impact?
Well, if we think about numbers, I think one question is, so how many hunters do we want? So as you said earlier, we can't have 200 million active deer hunters in North America, right? I mean, it would be insane.
Yeah, we'd have a lot more money to manage a lot less animals.
But you know what I mean? It wouldn't work, right? So what percentage of the population? Is 4% a good number? Is 40% is too many? Like 0.4% is probably less than we want. But I mean, somewhere in there, there's a sweet spot. The question that I'm interested in is less like the numbers. Yeah, it translates into conservation dollars, but there's other models for funding conservation, whether it's sales taxes or other ways to fund conservation that have been implemented in some places. It's more what's the cultural and political climate and around hunting. How is it understood, and how are those who are concerned about it or opposed to it, how are they engaged? And how are those who practice hunting engaged in the conversation, so that hunting is something that can go on and not just be banned because it gets hated, but something that is recognized as being a practice that has environmental value, has ethical value, is a reasonable and defensible and valuable way of engaging with the natural world. And that's what I want to see happen, right? And I don't know that it particularly matters whether 2% of Americans hunt or 12% of Americans hunt. The other 98% or 88%, how are they perceiving it, if they're perceiving it at all?
Yeah.
What's their... And right now, pretty consistently over the decades, you look at the survey data, by and large, Americans support hunting if it's done for certain reasons, if there are certain values implicit in it. If it's done for other reasons or other values implicit in it, not so much.
Yeah, in popular culture, we made kind of a dividing line, right? Hunt for food? Good. I don't know. The numbers are always plus 90% of people, or at least plus 80% of most that I've seen. They vary as they would. That, if you say, do you agree with hunting for food? And that simple question, 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 people say yes. And then if you switch it, if you say, do you agree with trophy hunting? Almost everybody.
Right. And then it becomes kind of, well, what does that mean? What does trophy hunting mean? And, what if you're, you value the meat and you're looking for a big animal? I mean, there's lots of layers to those conversations.
And in removing those layers in the more popular sense, that's where we are. That's exactly where we are. We're kind of stuck with these two, polarized versions of what hunting is. It's either really ethical and really trendy and really good for you and really, if society is just asking, is this a good thing? We've decided, I think, that is, and that this other thing, trophy hunting, is kind of the underbelly of the practice, right?
And that's a much trickier
set
of things to unpack.
It would be terrible to unpack it, but I think you're right that there are some forces. Hopefully, this podcast and what we're doing at Meat Eater can be seen as that we're just trying to kind of walk forward this idea that we truly and strongly believe in. I know you do too. That when done ethically, when done right, when done thoughtfully, hunting is a prescription. It's a medicine for how we relate to animals, how we eat them, our own diets, and all those things.
Our sense of being part of the natural world, all these things. Yeah, absolutely. And the people who didn't grow up hunting but come to it later, even if they just think about it, even if they just try it for a year or two, they become ambassadors to family members, coworkers, circles of friends who may not include any other hunters, just to shift the conversation and say, here's another perspective, or, here's why I tried it, or here's why I still do it. Does it matter if they remain part of the X% of, Americans who hunt and then pass it on to their kids? If they do, great. But they just change the conversation a bit.
Yeah, and I think we're generationally in a space where we can change that conversation going forward for good. Not that like a patrilineal look at hunting like I got and a lot of people that I know have, like my father taught me a certain way to go, and it really wasn't based on the things we just discussed. It was based on this is what we do. It's a pastime. It didn't devalue the animal, but it certainly didn't have the step to it.
Right. But it's interesting. When I went back to grad school and did some research on this and started interviewing folks, one thing that I recognized is that a lot of folks who grew up hunting, there were things about their lives, their family's background, their hunting, maybe all of those things, that they just took for granted, like feeling connected to the land. Maybe they were a farming family, or they just hunted, but they felt connected to the land, so they took that for granted. They knew where at least some of their food came from, including some of their meat. They took that for granted. They enjoyed being in the outdoors and these amazing experiences they have, some of which have to do with the animals, some of which don't. There's all kinds of things that they just took for granted that many folks who come in hunting later in life and who come for those reasons, they want to feel more connected to the land, they want to know where more of their food comes from, they want to have these experiences in the outdoors, etc. They're actually valued by both groups.
Yeah.
But someone who grew up hunting, you inhaled that as a kid, right? We just took that for granted. So you weren't consciously thinking. You maybe were consciously thinking about, the challenge of it, or the this, the that, whatever the sort of was forefront of one's mind that you would have identified. Here's why I hunt, and all those things I take for granted. Yeah, I guess that's also why I hunt, but that's just taken for granted. And so I think we just emphasize different things.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Even though we actually share a huge amount in common, what's at the forefront of my mind as I'm coming out of being a vegan is ethical meat and a confrontation with life and death.
Yeah.
Right. Well, my buddy who grew up hunting,
he's like,
yeah, I get that.
I love hanging with my dad.
Right. But the food and the life and death, he has been living and breathing that since he was 12 years old.
Yeah, me too. And I find that, what I found that through having these exact conversations that I found myself jealous of the adult onset hunter and vice versa, right? I'm like, hey, I never really got to think about this until I was a little bit older, and I was exposed to people like yourself and Steve Rennell and other folks that kind of throw that at me and said like, hey, look, you have to understand natural history. You have to understand how the natural world works and how ecosystems work and what habitat is. And I always felt like I missed a lot of that. I think a lot of the adult onset hunters would look back at me and say, you got an incredible gift where you could spend time with hunting, where you could just appreciate the practice and the craft and the nature of it without having to wrestle and struggle with the more existential, worldly
and you got
issues.
Immersed in this knowledge and skill.
It was,
by the time you were 15 years old, you'd probably learned and then forgotten you learned more things than I've yet learned about actually hunting, right?
Yeah. So
the skills.
The way that I got to experience it was very much how it was passed down over many, many generations. And now we have a whole new generation of adult onset hunters. I think you would fall into that. That are learning it with a whole new prism, a whole new lexicon of things to try to understand. And I think I don't know, I'd love to hear what you think on this. I think that has the ability to change what hunting is and morph it generationally, down the road where there's a lot, say there's 1 million, I don't know what the number is, say there's a couple of million adult onset hunters over the next decade that jump in, and they jump in for the reasons that you did or reasons similar to you. They're going to teach their kids that this thing they learned, that, as you said, that enriches their lives, and then they become ambassadors and they're really into it. They're listening to crap like this and reading books and jumping in to people like yourself and George Pellegrini and Jesse Griffiths and folks like that. Yeah. And so that you feel like I do, that it has a chance to kind of generationally redefine, for a lot of people at least, what hunting is and kind of set that path.
And I think if we can do that in a way that, like this conversation, brings together the lifelong hunter and the new hunter, instead of saying, we need to take this old rotten thing called hunting and transform it culturally so it's acceptable. No. You know, let's find a way to honor and respect this whole suite of perspectives that are coming to this and all these backgrounds. And you know, we're not all going to become the same kind of hunters or, you know, think exactly the same way, but we can have a shared understanding of what it is we are each doing out there, and be in conversation with the public more broadly, you know, and the culture more broadly about hunting, and just honor those perspectives.
That's the trick, right? I mean, that's the trick. I think I probably fall into that trap, and I think a lot of people that really want to see change and really want to be able to go to somebody and be like, look at this thing in its totality. Look at hunting in its totality and how great it is. It does have cracks. It does have blemishes. There's things that most hunters don't agree with that are happening in a very legal sense in the hunting space.
Right.
And so I think that is therein lies the major issue with folks that have a voice. Like, do you say, I'm frustrated with this, let's end it? Or, hey, listen, I grew up doing this. I grew up watching hunter specialties DVDs and idolizing guys that were shooting big bucks and like Real Trees monster bucks, 20 big bucks in 20 minutes. That was like how I grew up.
Right.
I'm not going to discredit that now that I've come to some other understanding about what this really is and kind of grown. I'm going to say, like, I appreciate that's where I came from. I understand that I got to live a life where that could be kind of under the guise of my father and the culture that we lived in. I was able to do that and not have to worry about any of this other stuff. I'm glad I got to do both, but some people, I think, like you said, want to change. I've had people on this podcast that there's a magazine called Modern Huntsman, and its editor came on here and basically just said there's an old way and there's a new way, and I'm the new way. And in a lot of ways, I can agree, but boy, that's troublesome. That seems fraught.
I mean, that kind of, you know, sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. One of the things that I have argued, and I think I do argue in one spot in the book, is that because hunters in this culture are a minority, you know, one of our main challenges is how we get perceived by the majority, right? And that's part of what the struggles are over. What's the new way, old way? What's going to work? Be more sensitive to public values, you know, mainstream values. I think it's an important conversation to have. We need to be aware of the reality of what hunting is and how it's perceived, and yet we also need to find ways not to dishonor, you know, some of the real roots, the cultural roots of hunting as it has, you know, existed for decades and centuries.
And I think that's proven tough for hunting. It's proven very tough. You can look at it in any number of ways. You can look at it in the archery space where crossbows are not, you know, I know that my dad now has shoulder issues and shoots a crossbow and has found hunting much more pleasurable later in life because he's deadly with this crossbow and with a vertical bow. Yeah. He had a lot of trouble over the years wounding deer, and it kind of it worried him. So just that one example, but there's a lot of examples within our space where there's an example by I've been naming a lot of names here of magazines and brands. I love Modern Huntsman. Tyler, don't take offense to the point I just made, but there was another magazine that's been around for a very long time that just had an article that talked about it was full of angst and a little bit of anger, and it was pointed towards the food culture and hunting and kind of this cross section that we've touched on a bit here. And there was some anger in that, well, we don't want people just coming in the hunting space just to eat. You know, they have to understand that there's other things. You know, we want to celebrate Sloppy Joe sandwiches and venison burgers, and we don't want to have to just be cooking shanks and be told that there's so many people coming into our hunting space that just want it for this reason. And I felt, for reasons you've already explained, I felt like, man, that's tough. That's a loss for us, I feel. If we're gonna act that way in regards to like how people come in. And I don't think anybody comes in with a foodie mindset is saying that Sloppy Joes suck. But the guy that loves Sloppy Joes shouldn't be saying that you can't have a refined ossobuco and celebrate it. Right. So there's just an example of something that came up.
Right. I mean, there's all sorts of sort of culture and class connotations that come into that, right? It's like, oh, you know, who's coming, sort of taking over our tradition, who's moving in on our space politically, culturally. There's again sort of defensiveness about that, and there's can be from either direction sort of a superiority, like ours is the real way or the right way, and that kind of righteousness is not going to get us very far in the long run.
Yeah, it was a shocker for me when I read it. I thought that I understood it. I understand the sentiment, like you just said, that that's a perfect way to articulate that feeling where I think this is starting to come out more. I'm seeing it more around. Of course, we're exposed to more things via the social media, but you've seen it more around where there is an angst about where some of this more ass hunting gets popularized, and there's popular hunters, guys like Joe Rogan and Cameron Hanes. This hunting kind of gets introduced to more people. The folks that are kind of either sitting in the background or what you would consider more core, or folks that don't see hunting as this aspirational new thing, as we've talked about, that kind of where I was when I was a kid and where major parts of my family are now. That's happening. There is a microculture war going down. I'm probably heightened to it because I sit in the industry and I read as much as I can, but it's happening at some level.
Right.
Have you seen any of that from where you are? Are you exposed to that? Or is that something? Am I just being insular?
No,
I read so much of it.
Right. When I am immersed more in it, I definitely have seen some of that. I think a lot of some of it's cultural and regional. Some of it's generational. I mean, I think it's going to work itself out. We're going to figure it out over time. And, just like, attitudes about, you never take antlerless deer. You only take bucks because we need the population to grow. I was like, well, a lot of people have realized that in a lot of parts of the country, but there's way too many deer, we actually can't do that anymore. We actually have to do this differently. And especially the younger generations, both lifelong hunters and new hunters, have embraced that and, recognize the ecology and biology involved and we'll take those happily. But you'll still have some old timers who are like, no, I'm not going to do that. Just refuse. And I get it. It's all right. So I think these conversations will sort of work themselves out within the hunting community.
Yeah. I think social media always, I hate to always harp on that but it's such a factor in how we communicate. I think it has very much influenced because we're able to get a more visual look at the cultural differences in hunting. I mean, I say you follow 1,000 people and they're from all over the country, and your feed or whatever you're looking at is full of all these different perspectives and different ways to communicate hunting. And you see that, and then all of a sudden you are now thinking, well, I don't like this and I like this. I like this and I don't like that. And then you set your echo chamber up that way, and then you push away all these different types of hunting and different types of hunters. I would argue that it's always been like that. It's just amplified now because we can see it. I think that has to be true on some level.
Yeah.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Two things I want to circle back to. One, the comment I just made about age. There's a lot of older hunters I know who are perfectly happy to take does and get the ecology and biology. I don't want to say like, oh, the younger hunters get it and the old guys don't. That's not true at all. Because I know a lot of older hunters who
it's
really
generally more
really do get it.
Yeah, generally more acceptable though in the younger.
Yeah, there's just a few sort of holdouts from the previous generation who just won't go there.
As always.
Right, exactly. And some of this resistance, that you were talking about to a particularly refined type of cuisine coming into hunting, or just food is not the only motive for hunting, and just sort of this defensiveness and insularity or division within the hunting community. One of the things that I found really helpful from this, there's this whole model called adaptive leadership about sort of social and cultural change. And one of the points they make in that is that people aren't really resistant to change. People are resistant to loss. People make choices to change all the time. Oh, I get a new job with more pay. I'll take it. Oh, I get an opportunity to, get married to someone I love and maybe have a family. I'll take it. Like, people are choosing change all the time. Does it present challenges? Yes, but they choose change. Yeah. People don't choose loss.
It's huge. Yeah, that's huge.
And so when I think that's what some people within, some hunters and some subgroups of hunters have a fear loss when they see this other group coming in, sort of trying to quote take over hunting or change what hunting is. It's that, and that's what we need to manage and sort of have conversations about. Yeah. Is there really loss happening, and what's going on there?
That's maybe the best way I've ever heard that explained, and I've thought about that a lot. And people who listen to this podcast will cringe at even talking about the grip in photo, because we talk about that a lot. I think it's become emblematic of what you're talking about,
right?
In terms of change versus loss, and I've always brought up that I think it would be nice if we should think about going away from that and changing how we do it. I don't really do that anymore. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's just it's not the right way that I want to put out my hunting story. I don't think we all understand why we even do that, why we all sit behind an animal and take a photo. I don't think we really understand why. And if you start looking back, it's baked into some parts of our culture I don't think we understand historically and in other ways.
I can send you a link to an article. Actually, it was originally came out in High Country News, and BHA reprinted it online about the photo.
Yeah.
And
I remember reading that.
Yeah.
I remember reading that.
What are the ethics and the emotions that are behind that photo, and how do different people perceive it?
And
different parts of the culture.
I got into that so I started saying that, right? There's a lot of people that push back on me saying, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And this is how I feel about this photo. I don't want to lose it. Mm-hmm. And then as you're just explaining change versus loss, I think what I'm talking about is change and how they see it as loss. And the points I've made in the past were very much around, we're changing all the time. We're changing the way that we depict ourselves in hunting and in other parts of our life based on society and culture and what's generally acceptable all the time without even knowing it. There's things that we would have done 50 years ago on a fishing pier that we would never do right now. And we didn't actively say, everybody stop doing that. But over time, we changed. And that gradual change is more acceptable. But when I articulate it as, I just quit doing it because I was done with it. I think it comes across as like this may be a loss for our culture.
Right, or it's being taken away.
It's being taken. You're saying that you want to just take this away from us.
Right.
When I think I'm more, as I develop this thought and try to understand my own feelings about this silly little photo that has become a bigger thing. What you just said is, I think, incredibly profound around those ideas and how we present them and navigate them and why we feel angry one way or the other about it.
And something as simple as a photo like that, or a genre of photo, a type of photo, can be incredibly powerful as a symbol. Right? It's a cultural symbol.
Yeah.
And you want to take that away from me? And my identity is wrapped up in that. And you can't take that away. All kinds of things get.
Yeah, I've felt that. And I think one way to look at it would be like, oh, there's a lot of assholes on the internet. But I don't look at it that way. I look at, why are these people angry about this? And why is this, why does this trigger, to use a term that's probably oversold, why does this trigger this? Because I feel personally that it's been good for me. I've gone back and forth about doing it, and not having to sit down and take the photo has been helpful. Like I think for me that photo symbolizes a lot of things I don't agree with within the hunting culture. So for me personally, it's removed some of those things from my experience. But that's just me. Anybody, I think anybody can do what they want. It can be argued that photo certainly has done some bad things for hunting when it's used in a negative way, but it also is a positive in many ways too. So that, for me, I think, as much as people are probably tired of hearing it, is emblematic of or analogous to what you're talking about there. Yeah. And so that would be a good thing for folks to return to and remember from this conversation, that change versus loss example. That's a big one. That's a big one.
I realized that early in the conversation, you asked about one thing and we went way down deep.
That's always how podcasts are designed.
But I mean, you asked about like when I got into hunting, how did I get ready to go out into the woods? And I don't know if you want to go back to that briefly.
Please. Please. I wasn't going to let you out of here without that.
All right.
Please do.
All right. We dove off into the philosophy in a hurry, which is fun.
You could call my podcast that, diving off into philosophy.
Right.
Too soon.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I had handled firearms a bit as a kid, so that wasn't a big barrier for me, but I'd never, gone and hunted for food beyond bullfrogs, I never hunted mammals. I certainly didn't know what I would do with any mammal, let alone a deer, if I were to get one. So, and this was, I was getting into this in like 2004, basically, when I started getting into hunting. Started thinking about it a little earlier, but really started to get into it in 2004. And my uncle is a hunter. So I have one immediate family member, my mom's brother, who's a hunter. And though he lives about a 5-hour drive away, we exchanged thousands of emails, I swear. I mean, I was just peppering him with questions, and I was reading and just trying to orient myself. And I did some small game hunting. I did, hunt snowshoe hare up in Vermont a bit. And that was a powerful experience to take a hare. And then, having done, Hunter Ed and read a bunch of articles and talked to my uncle, I had some sense of being kind of ready to go deer hunting.
Did you find Hunter Ed helpful?
I did. I mean, it's limited, right? Because the basic model is based on, kids who are coming out of hunting families. It's not a mentorship program. Those are being developed in various states and by various organizations, but it's a safety, it's hunter safety.
Yeah,
is what it really is, and so it covers some basics that are important, and it goes beyond safety a bit. It talks a little bit about conservation and ethics and so forth to some extent, but it's not like a field training to really train you how to hunt. Yeah. It assumes that you have built into your social network or your family the people or person who's going to teach you.
Yeah, it's the minimum. Here's the minimum you really have to know and be capable of. Yeah.
So, it did, you alluded to, I bet you didn't get one the first time you went out. And, I didn't get a deer my first 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's not, where I am, it's not uncommon. I mean, deer are not that dense and the terrain is pretty thick in a lot of vegetation. It's not that easy to find deer in a lot of the country that I hunt. So I was glad the first year, actually. No, not glad, but I'm not sure I was really ready to take a deer. But that first year that I hunted with my uncle for a few days, and he got a deer while we were together. And so I was able to help him with that, which is perfect.
Huge.
Like that's exactly like what I was ready for. The next year I tried, I took a shot or two and missed that things I shouldn't have taken, and was, sort of horrified by how easily that could have been a bad hit. So that was difficult. But my third year came along. I was like, all right, come on already. Like, why am I doing this still?
It's cold.
Is there really any point? I'm supposedly out here doing this thing, but it's totally inefficient. I'm not actually getting any food from this. I'm not, this is kind of silly.
I'm hungry.
But in retrospect, I'm glad like it didn't happen in my first or even second year, that I needed to have a number of experiences and spend some time really experiencing the hunt and some of the questions that come up and some of the challenges of it before I finally got to
talk about building value for something. You waited 3 years. Anything you have to wait 3 years
That's right.
to get.
So early in my fourth year, I got my first deer, and that was incredibly powerful. And I didn't know if I'd ever want to do it again. I was just like, after all that, here's a big dead animal. Like, I mean, and there was a lot of grief. I mean, just taking the life of a big, beautiful animal.
Is that what you remember? We just had a young lady that works at Meat Eater on, and she talked about briefly something that struck me more after the conversation than it did in the moment. That she, on her first deer, which was just a couple of weeks ago now, had a moment with the deer where the deer was looking at her. It's only 100 yards away, 80 yards away. And she in her mind thought, this deer knows what's going to happen, and I'm more comfortable now that it knows. Like somehow it would recognize the situation, the predatory situation. So that was just an interesting one to me. Other new hunters that I've run across are really interested in how quickly it dies and if there's any twitching or there's any, so those things I've run into. What did you have any, kind of thoughtful moments or things that struck you during that first death, I guess, as it were?
Yeah. I mean, I was really committed to not taking the shot unless I was sure. And this is, like I said, thick woods, ended up being like 30 yards broadside, waited for the deer to take an extra step. So there were no twigs between me and that deer, or between me and that, vital area. And, I shot that deer through the heart at 30 yards, and it ran and fell and was done. And I wanted it to go that quickly. But I think I really experienced shock, just emotional shock. Shock had finally happened. I was like, after this many, hours and weeks and years trying, shocked that it happened. But emotional shock of just the impact at a heart or soul level of taking the life of another animal as big as you are or bigger. There's something about that, especially if you've didn't grow up doing it, that hits you pretty, not for everybody, but it hit me pretty hard. And for a couple of days, I was just in kind of an altered state of consciousness, just like, whoa, and during those couple of days, I'd always known, especially because, going back to the beginning of our conversation, I was coming to hunting with many of the same basic values I came to vegetarianism with, including I'm going to confront where my food comes from and really be honest about it. So I'd known from the get-go that if at all possible, I was going to do all the butchering myself. I wasn't going to take it somewhere, have someone else do it. And so in those few days, it was a couple of days right after this kill when I was in this altered state, I was also, skinning this deer and quartering this deer and butchering this deer. And that process of just the rhythm of working with a knife and breaking down this animal ended up being really important for me. Like in that process, I realized this feels like really familiar, even though I've never done it before, except helping my uncle. But it feels appropriate and fitting. It's part of how I relate to this place and this land and how I eat. And it feels sort of ancient and, sort of almost cellular memory of doing this. And okay, even though it was emotionally shocking, this makes sense for me. And I'm not eager to run out like next week and shoot another deer. I'm not, in fact. But by next year, yeah,
I'll be ready.
I'll probably go back out in the field and try to do this again.
And that's where listening to that, when you talk about altered state of consciousness, like those are next level experiences, I think, within our world. It's like a very three-dimensional experience. And for me, as somebody who didn't really get that, and by the time I was consciously able to have an experience like that, or mature enough to have an experience like that, I had experienced so many deaths that I could never get there. I've had a lot of those same kind of profound moments with far-flung places and animals I've never seen, but just confronting the death in that way, I'm unable to do it. I can't do it because I had experienced that. I remember as a kid seeing my dad shoot a first deer, and he is gutting it, and I remember its intestines were still moving and snaking along, and that's burned in my psyche, like many other things. But I would never have had, what is almost could be described what maybe you're describing as like a transcendental experience with hunting. And so there again, just a relationship to that you were able to come from a vegan standpoint. And I think as a kid or even as a younger hunter, if you're waiting 3 years for something, you're more impulsive when you get a chance to do it rather than more thoughtful, which you were, which maybe came from being a vegan.
And my second year of taking a couple stupid shots that I never should take. I'm like, okay, I won't do that again.
I find myself sometimes overconfident. I haven't got a deer this year. I'm going to take the further shot rather than sticking to. And so we talk about ethics here a lot, and I find myself in my own ethical fuck-ups and things that I probably shouldn't be doing, given my experience and my a little bit of my ego around being a experienced hunter. So I run into that, but listening to your story, I think there's a lot of profundity in what that you went through. Even for me, listening to it from the other side of the table.
And the experience has changed over the years. I mean, it's not like the second time was still like a powerful, and the third time was still, and it's still a big experience to take a deer, but it doesn't do quite the same thing to my consciousness. Like it doesn't have the same emotional shock and the same sort of level of grief of like, oh my God, this animal's dead. And I'm the instrument of that. I did that. It's not the same.
Yeah.
I've integrated it to my psyche more. So it's now more, it was like this, like a meteor coming in, hitting a planet, right? Like the experience, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
If you think of it, it was like this massive impact. And now it's like, no, that's already part of my psyche. It's already integrated. And it's still an important and reverent and powerful experience, but it's not this collision.
Yeah, and I have a 3-year-old son and about to have another one here in a month or so. And I think about them when you're talking, and I was introduced in a wonderful way. Like I have great appreciation for the outdoors via my family, my father especially. Now that I'm a father, I think about these concepts and exactly when and how do I explain it. Because my son already sees me out elk hunting all the time, and every time we go outside, he's like, "Are we going to see an elk?" We were in Maryland this week for the holidays. We went outside to go for a walk in the woods, and he's like, "Are we going to see an elk? Are we going to hunt an elk? Are we going to make hamburgers?" No, nobody. We're not. Unfortunately, I'd like there to be an elk here.
Right.
There used to be long time ago.
That's right.
But I think about that now in the future sense. Where do I go with him? I'm not going to drop the bombs of ethics and consumption and our humanity and our ancestral past. I'm not going to drop those bombs on him for quite a while. But I also don't want to forget about him when that happens. So this is something I'm thinking about, and I'm sure that you have too, about the future of this thing and generationally what we do with it.
Yeah.
Where do you land on that? If you're explaining to someone who has a young desire to get into this, how do you walk them through it, or how would you, I guess, in this case?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've started to mentor a young guy who's now 13 over the past couple of years. Started to get him into it, and hey, we haven't gotten him in deer yet, but we will soon. He knows about my book, and like I think he has a copy, and he can read it if he wants when he's ready, or like he started it, and I'm always open to asking questions, to answering his questions. But I'm also not. I sort of wait for things to come up naturally in conversation. When it's safety and ethics in terms of making a clean shot, then I'm going to be proactive at making sure that we have that conversation, not in some giant philosophical way, but like let's talk about shot angles and let's get this really clear and do that kind of technical mentoring, and not driving my sort of personal philosophy either. And he'll come out with he'll go through a hunter education class, and they walk him through a practical course at the end as part of his conservation camp, and there's different shot opportunities. Would you take this? Why not? There's no necessarily right or wrong answer unless it's a safety issue, but they're walking through this course, and he gets to this one, and there's 2 bears, and he said no. I mean, I wouldn't take the shot. And someone asked him, the instructor asked him why not, and he says, well, they're together. And like he's recognizing the relationship between the animals, just like a doe and a fawn.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hunters, including lifelong hunters, who they might take a doe, but not if there's a fawn there, even though they know that fawn will survive. But there's the relationship, and I think great. That's
Yeah. And then we make these conscious decisions. If for me, I was just recently in a situation where they said, well, was hunting in Texas. There's an old lady on this ranch. She really wants food. She can't go out and hunt herself. She's kind of the patriarch of this ranch in which we were hunting. And my first thought was, I'm going to shoot the first deer I see. Mm-hmm. Don't really care. Size of deer. They had to do a deer call anyway. They had to kill 100 does. And so some of the gloves, kind of the ethical gloves, come off when you have like, I've reasoned my way into first thing I see, let's go. They're going to have to kill these deer anyway, and this is going to go to a good cause. I'll be able to personally deliver this food to this 88-year-old lady who wouldn't be able to get it herself. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself just first doe I saw, crack, done, took a shot. It worked out fine. But then afterwards, it was a year-old deer that I normally wouldn't have shot. I've taken it back to camp, and some of the guys there are cool. That's kind of a small one, without knowing the situation, and then I have to explain it away. Yeah. Just got me thinking about it. I don't feel like it was a wrong thing, but there were just little moments in there where we like to, either take the gloves off, or in moments where we can, we do. So it's interesting. I'm sure he'll be doing that for the next 30 years or 50 years, however long he hunts.
Yeah.
Do you think going back to your experience from vegan to hunter, do you think that'll become more common? I know we've kind of touched on maybe why it happens and danced around philosophically. Do you feel tangibly that because veganism is growing, that there will be some sort of return to hunting?
Like we talked about, I think that that micro trend of non-hunters as adults getting into hunting, including some who are ex-vegetarians, ex-vegans, that's certainly happening. I've been surprised. Like, I thought, God, this is kind of weird that I'm becoming a hunter after being a vegetarian. When I was going through it, I thought, this is weird. But over the years, I've heard about and met more and more people who have done that. I was like, maybe it's not so weird. It's not that uncommon. So, sure. I mean, if there's a bit of an uptick in veganism, and then some people are returning to more of an omnivorous diet, but bringing those questions and those values back to their new diet, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bit more of that.
Looking back on your book now, I mean, it's been some 7 years or six and some years since it came out. What do you think about that experience? Being able to put that out there and like you said, talk to a lot of different people and go and promote it. I mean, we're way past that point in a book's life cycle, but what do you think?
It was a great experience. I mean, I said I had done some freelance writing, but I'd never written a book, and was not even sure about the book talk and promotion process. But it stretched me. I mean, it gave me a great experience. I felt like I needed to write that one book. Will I write another book? Maybe. But for whatever reason, that was a story that I needed to find a way. For me, it just felt important. I felt called to do that one and to engage in that conversation in a variety of ways, online and in person and through the book. And so I think it was a really valuable experience for me, and seems to have been welcomed by a wide range of people, hunters and non-hunters. And so I'm glad to have been able to contribute that.
Yeah. No, I think it's, as I remember, it's been 5 years now since I've read fully through when I was picking up some excerpts and prep for this, but I found it to be, I think at the time and even now, as strangely a modern American story. It's kind of, you don't expect that. Not that anybody would even maybe want that, but in terms of our diet and our choices and how we move through this world, like, it's pretty strangely modern American. Like, we're having to have these thoughts and think through some of this stuff. And I remember being impacted by that. And even now, thinking back to it, there's some threads in here to what we're all thinking and trying to do.
Yeah. Well, like anything, it's a product of its times, right? It's a product of what's going on in the culture and society right now.
Yeah. 7 years feels like for you, I'm sure it feels like forever.
Right. But it's still, it's not the 1950s, right? It's still pretty recent.
That's true. That's true. Well, thanks for joining me. I do appreciate it. I know I always jog off into the philosophical very quickly.
My pleasure.
In doing it. I think one thing in closing, I'm going to keep bringing up Game Changers because it's something that, like I said, I was just answering our THC at the MeatEater.com inbox, and there's a bunch of people that were asking questions about that documentary. Do you feel like there's a way to take either your story or a story like it and produce something as effective as it seems like Game Changers has been in telling? Game Changers, again, tells the story of vegan athletes and really goes through to the vegan diet and presents meat as some sort of poisonous alternative to the vegan diet. I wonder, I know our own company, Steve Rinella, made a documentary called Stars in the Sky, but it didn't get the same visibility as Game Changers. Do you feel like that's on the horizon or could be done? I don't
know if it's on the horizon, but I think it definitely could be done. I think there's been some places where I've seen examples that relate to that about like environmental education for kids. There's a great relatively short documentary called Mother Nature's Child, and it ties into like Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv and all the sort of environmental education, Stephen Kellert's work and all this environmental education work. And there's a little section in there on hunting. And it's this like 12-year-old girl who's going out for her first deer hunt. Because the overall film it's not like this is about, meat and hunting. The overall film is about environmental education and getting kids connected to nature. But within that, there's this little section on hunting. And so I've seen a few examples like that where it's presented as part of a conversation that reaches an audience that I think is maybe not thinking about hunting much, but it comes in from an angle that resonates. And so whether it's about food and local food and sustainable food and ethical food, and hunting is part of that conversation.
Yeah.
If it comes in like in blaring neon lights, this is about hunting.
Yeah.
You
never know.
Not necessarily the best way to engage to start the conversation.
Yeah, you're talking about a very pragmatic, common sense approach to, hey, this is a part of this conversation, as opposed to this Game Changers that seems like it's just blasting out one thing. And so I think it's a big part of the conversation for me, especially with this cultural creep that we're experiencing. Will there be a galvanizing moment where folks that aren't sitting in this room, a lot of the people in this library probably don't really know much about this conversation. Is there a galvanizing moment that we're headed towards? That question none of us can answer, but it would be nice.
Yeah. I think it may not be a galvanizing moment, but over the past like 10, 15 years, it's like started to happen.
Yeah. Well, and you've been a large part of that with your book, so you can still go and purchase. We act like it's in the annals of time.
That's right. So somewhere in the archives.
You still go to Amazon and purchase The Mindful Carnivore. I suggest if you haven't read it, you do so. Thank you, Tovar.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks, Ben.
All right.
I guess I grew up on an older road.
That is it. That is all. We are done.
Wow. I really like the mix-up there.
Yeah, it's more like a Ebenezer Scrooge Christmas type of thing that I'm doing. hey, a couple of days here. Next week, next Monday. This is going to be the Meat Eater. What do we call it, Phil? Meat Eater Christmas special?
I don't think it has a holiday extravaganza.
Extravaganza?
I have no idea. I'm sure Corinne will name it something. Name it something entertaining.
And unless they kick me off, I'll be on there. I wrote something called...
No, let's not spoil it.
I'm spoiling it,
No,
Phil.
Ben wrote something that you can hear on the Meat Eater Holiday Extravaganza.
I was going to read the whole thing.
Oh, no. That's a horrible idea.
Oh, okay. Go... If you listen, the expectation is everybody that listens to this knows about Meat Eater podcast. But anyway, go over there. Listen to the Meat Eater Holiday Christmas Spectacular.
It's something fun. It's something clever, and Ben did a great job, and you're going to want to hear it.
Can I not say what it is?
No, don't say what it is.
You're fucking, wow, Phil's starting to get a big
Well,
head
now
about
people
this.
are going to go over there because they're going to be curious.
Yeah, we should keep talking about it. But go over there and listen to that. That's going to be cool. It was fun. I dressed up like Santa in like a dime store Santa costume. It was terrible. It's terrible. Embarrassing. So check that out. Also, we don't talk about much anymore here, Phil, with the Hunting Collective. This is the season to buy stuff. TheMeatEater.com. We don't talk about that too much anymore. We got too caught up with other stuff. But if you go over there and you go to shop and you go to apparel, you're going to see stuff like the Aldo freaking Leopold t-shirt. There's some Hunting Collective hats still left in stock. There's a Hunting Collective hoodie still left in stock. There's all kinds of stuff there that you can buy, THC related. And hopefully we will make some more as time goes on. And so, what I found also? We sold out of them, but we used to have a Pro Nuance Anti-Bullshit t-shirt. There's a lot of people out there swiping my t-shirt, Phil.
Really?
Yeah.
Some knockoffs?
Yeah, a lot of knockoffs out there. So if it's not at themeateater.com, report it to the authorities.
Yep.
Right?
Yes. Be a good citizen.
Tell the police. The internet police. That people are ripping off my idea. Because probably nobody's ever thought of that before.
Nope.
I'm real proud of it. Anyway, a lot of stuff for you to do, a lot of stuff for you to buy, but I'm only saying this because I figure you're in the buying mood anyway. And so, that's it. That's all I got. Phil, you got anything else?
Nah, I don't have anything.
Next week is Christmas, and we're going to be gone.
Yes, we will be.
We're out.
We're out of here.
So we're giving you the best of THC starting next week for 4 straight weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The best of THC. You're going to love it. A lot of you wrote in to tell us what to do. We put together a lot of episodes for you. The first episode features my favorite characters, and that's Wyman Menzer, Dushan Smintana, Charles Rodney. That's the first episode. Those are my favorite characters from 90-some episodes of the Hunting Collective. We have appearances from Steve Ranella learning about Game of Thrones. We got Cameron Haynes doing a pack dump talking about The Bachelor. We've got a rewind on our trip to Berkeley. We have a whole show about bear attacks where guys get their sacks ripped open by bears and faces ripped up by bears. We have a whole episode on Legends of the Outdoors. Valerius Geist returns. Jim Posowitz and Colonel Tom Kelly. So lots of that. I very much enjoyed putting that together over the weekend for everybody because I love all those people and I love all those moments and they're very special to me. So enjoy those for the holidays. We're going to go celebrate Christmas. I'm going to have a child, but we'll see after all that in about a month. Anything else to say, Phil?
Just be safe and have fun out there, you guys.
Yeah.
And gals.
Yeah.
Hope to see you again after the new year.
Come back soon. Bye.
Bye.
Stay here too long, 'cause I can't go a week without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Drinking in heaven. Sitting as the boss food starts to grow roots. I'm feeling like an old worn out pair of shoes. Oh, tell me what is it that I should do?
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.